I'm sure you know the word slum or ghetto. Every language has it. It might be favela in Brazil or a basti in India, but nonetheless, we all know what slums are visually. There are sections of cities which are absolute disasters. And one of the questions that every mayor asks is, now, why are those ghettos so hard to change? Why is it that we have spent millions in our city and billions as a nation, and these cancers in our cities seem to prevail? In fact, they expand. What is happening? And you know that they are happening all over the world. Well, I was on a task planning team one time, and we decided to look at a neighborhood and find out why it is that with all the millions of dollars pouring into this community, it hadn't changed. In fact, it's worse. Now, how do you study an urban neighborhood? Well, we decided to study first what I will call the medical sector of the community. By medical sectors, I mean hospitals, I mean clinics, Medicare and Medicaid. Why did we do that? We did that because in the United States, at least, when the government, state or federal, let's talk state for a moment, when Austin or Olympia or Sacramento targets money for the poor, it doesn't give the money to the poor. Who does it give the money to? To those that serve the poor. The chief beneficiary is the medical system, the hospital, the clinic. Now, this is true in my state, and it's true in almost every state except California, that 53 cents out of every dollar that is targeted to the poor is not given to the poor. In California, it's 65%, according to a RAND study. Now, how many people from this poverty area do you think work in these medical systems? Well, almost nobody. You're right, maybe a few categorical grants. But basically, if you analyze the medical dollar, it's a funnel. It's a giant funnel. Dollars in, dollars out. Dollars go where the providers of medical services are. The community gets medical mercy drops. Basically, the system says, give me the money so that I can give services to the poor. We decided we needed to study the educational systems. Those are huge in our cities, the public school system. Usually the largest employer in a city, often the largest employer. Now, at that time, Chicago had 500,000 kids in school, 650 buildings, citywide school buildings. We had a $2.6 billion budget. We had 50,000 unionized employees in the system. 86% of the budget went for unionized employees, chiefly teachers, administrators, and maintenance personnel. Let me ask, how many people from this neighborhood do you think work in this system? Almost nobody. When you analyze the educational dollar, it's another set of funnels. The dollars come in, the dollars leave, the community gets educational programs. You remember that old hymn, the old Wesley hymn, mercy drops around us are falling, but for the showers we plead. In this case, the showers go to the suburbs. Go where the professionals live. The mercy drops fall around the city. Now, by the way, are these systems succeeding or failing? We want to say failing. It's a trick question, actually. They're succeeding at the two things they are really designed to do. First, recruit funds, revenue. If you analyze most of these school budgets, they come from out of our city. 70% of the Chicago school budget came from out of the state, so state or federal sources. So it's a cash machine. Secondly, it's an employment machine. biggest employer in the city. Amoco is a huge business with 80,000 employees, but they're all over the world. The Chicago public system, followed by the University of Chicago, are big industries, employment-wise. So it wasn't totally a success. It wasn't totally a failure. If you think you can educate this just for educational reasons, you're wrong. It won't yield to that. It's a political system. It's an economic system. It's huge. Well, we decided we better look at some of the other systems in the city. Police, fire, parks, libraries, courts, jails, streets and sanitation, etc. At that time, there were 40,000 patronage workers, now civil service workers in our city. How many do you think live here? Almost nobody. In those days, they all lived in the Irish ward, Bridgeport, the Daily ward, to pay their daily bread dues. Basically, analyze this, another set of funnels, dollars in, programs in the community, dollars out. We decided we better analyze the bank that used to be there. There was one in the old days. State banks were made to charter, they were actually chartered to provide services for the people in the community. But in America, very often using old HUD maps, the banks, in the quietness of their own board meeting, drew what we call the red line. The moment they saw a black or brown face, they would retreat to their board and say, oh, no more 30-year mortgages for this neighborhood. No more home improvement loans. Why? Because there was an assumption that if people of color come into this neighborhood, it will decline of necessity. It will decline in ambiance, it'll decline in status, and then in reality it'll decline economically because white people will leave and they will take their businesses. And when that happens, the city will no longer pay attention to it because these are voter driven and will become a community of refugees, a community of non-voters, a community of public aid people. And so the bank, in the secrecy of its own board meeting, maybe 5 or 6 people, make a decision that's never announced, no more loans. That becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The moment that happens, the value of housing stock drops. The moment that happens, within a day or so, people start knocking at the door of the widows whose whole equity is in the little bungalow that they own as a widow. Psst, you better sell. You know who's coming. We call it panic peddling. Panic peddling drove the price down. There's a line in the book of Acts, I love it. Those lewd fellows of the baser sort. Isn't that a great line? Those lewd fellows of the baser sort. That's, in the RSV, it's called the urban rabble. I love the King James Version better. Those lewd fellows of the baser sort. Those are the sharks who live out here and have access to outside credit and start coming and putting up their signs. They know that within 2 years they can drive the property owners out of this place. People will sell. Now, the bank is still taking dollars from the neighborhood, right? Have they stopped are rejecting money? No, little old lady puts their money in the bank. Okay, bank is still collecting money. What's the bank doing with the money if it's not investing in housing? It's building suburban shopping malls. Here's the cruelest irony of all. The poor are funding their own demise. And then eventually the bank moves with them. We decided we better study the fast food industry, the Golden Arch. It's the biggest, easiest target, Chicago business. El Taco Loco and all the other fast foods come in. You know what we discovered? We surveyed 44 grocery stores, mom and pop stores. Poor people spend up to 40% more for food than middle-class families. They do so for varieties of reasons. The supermarkets fled, shut down. Insurance went up, deliveries went up, vandalism went up. They finally got tired and left. In their place are mom and pop stores, often located in housing that makes it technically illegal. The city could shut it down, but it winks at it. So all our cities have these little mom and pop stores with imploded wiring and plumbing, a lot of fires, and of course, high insurance because the gang has added a layer of insurance. Come and say, we'll protect your little business for you. This is going on in the north side of Fort Worth as we speak. I've been catching the reports about that and listening to the business owners talk about the gang influences in their community. That is endemic in many cities all over the world. You can read the movie City of God to see how that's affecting Brazil even as we speak. Now, McDonald's is still providing some benefits for the neighborhood. There's some residuals for the neighborhood. They hire people for 14 hours a week. Why 14 hours? You don't have to pay benefits. McDonald's has taken money out of the community. The poor people often then pay more. If you have a little 303 can of beans, it'll be 40% more. The hidden cost of credit is one thing. The little mom and pop stores don't have a warehouse. Where do they buy their produce? In suburban grocery stores on sale days. Just before the dairy codes expire, a fleet of cars come from the city and they buy the eggs that are 2 days or 1 day from expiration. So the suburban stores are unloading the produce. The urban stores buy it, which means the shelf life of the produce is gone. It's 50% of an egg is left. So the poor are paying more and they're getting less. It's very, very clear what is happening. Now, the poor people get, and of course, many of them have shared apartments by now. The absentee owners have split the apartment into smaller units, so they may not have a full stove. They may be heating with a hot plate, so they have to buy prepared foods. You're not going to buy sacks of potatoes and cook from scratch. 50% of the people may not have cars, so they have to buy daily. It may be that mom is working. 70% of the people may be single parent, female heads of household. The daughter may be the cook for the younger children. So with limited cooking knowledge and a limited hot plate, and if she had food, the rats would eat it, or somebody might steal it. All that's going on. Now the poor get some things beneficial from this. They get lots of sugar, right? Lots of fat, a lot of salt. They get an abundance of that. There are 4 things that they miss, we found. Vitamin C, iron, protein, and calcium. 4 things missing in the diet of most urban people. So they get sick all the time, among other things. Resistance. The mother has given birth to children. She doesn't replace the calcium. The bones bend. They get brittle. They break. They look old. They don't collect the Social Security. They don't live long enough. Well, we decided we better look at the businesses. There were some, you know. But it's like a Spike Lee movie, often run by ethnics who used to live here, who now exploit the people here sometimes. They might be Korean, they might be Arab, they might be Jewish, they might be black, but they moved out here to get a better school system. They come in here and they run. They hire people in the sweatshops. These are low-end assemblers. The businesses that's still there are not high-tech usually. And many of them now have made a deal with pimps. For example, there's a huge explosive number of undocumented people that are available for $4 an hour, not the official wage. The difference can be split between the pimp and the owner. And people who need jobs gratefully take them, and then they realize they can't make it because they have to send some money back home. and pay for their costs in Chicago. So the moment they say, you know, we'd like to get a raise, one call to INS and you sweep them out and you go for a whole new workforce. We're seeing since the 80s the reappearance of the sweatshops in many of these neighborhoods. Well, we decided we better look at the church. We said, now that'll be different. Well, guess what we found? 47 churches, almost all the pastors live out here too. So their kids access a better school. They commute in and the church runs programs just like the businesses and everybody else. We got a hold of this. There are 80,000 people living in this community. 80,000 people. One Chicago neighborhood that looked like Berlin after the war. When we got done analyzing the dollar flow, and mind you, we're not talking about red light districts here. We are not talking about prostitution and drugs. We're talking about legitimate dollars. You know what we found? We published it in a now out-of-print book called Managing Chicago's Urban Dollar, which I plan to reprint with this case study someday. Guess what we found? There's enough legitimate money flowing through this ghetto, enough money to keep the city of Rockford, Illinois alive and well and in the middle class. And Rockford, Illinois has 50,000 more people than this slum. Which leads us to say that in America, poverty is not about the absence of money, it's about the absence of power. Poverty is not about the absence of money. The money is there. This is third world USA, to borrow a metaphor. This is where the systems are not working. You may recall that in the Bible we have a book about an urban builder. His name is Nehemiah. Nehemiah got a government grant, letter of credit, leave of absence, and started the Model Cities Development Plan to rebuild Jerusalem, right? When he moved into Jerusalem, he did community organizing. Now, he could have called up the Judean Construction Company and said, hey, come and build a wall for the poor. But Nehemiah understood that the poor didn't need a wall. They needed to know how to build a wall. And so Nehemiah did organization. He got everybody, pagans and people with no faith, bad faith, good faith, all together. That's what community organizers do. They work with everybody in the community. Nehemiah worked with everybody. Now, what was not said about Nehemiah was that he couldn't have got his job done had Esther not done her job. You see, Esther is that other book about a lay woman who won the Miss Persia Beauty Contest, remember? First prize is I get to be rubbed in oil in the harem and marry the king. And if I marry the king and win the prize, I will access power and amend the law. Because if we don't get the law changed, the Jews will all be dead. If Nehemiah doesn't get the law changed, he's not going to be able to rebuild Jerusalem. He's Jewish. We talk about systemic evil. Esther is the one book in the Bible that teaches us that evil is systemic. You see, the conflict between Mordecai and Haman is not just personal. It was, and then it became tribal. But to see Mordecai is Jewish, Haman is a descendant of Amalek. He's a Haggite, descendant of Amalek. The Amalekites hated the Jews. It was tribal conflict up until Haman wrote it in the law code. At that point, you can't repent of the sin. You got to change the law. Esther is in the Bible to remind us that God calls lay people to move into the black hole of urban politics, off the map of comfortable middle-class Christianity. Esther moves into the world where God's name is not known. It's the only book in the Bible that doesn't have the name God. God is calling lay people, I believe, to move into the system. This is unjust. You can't just repent of this. You've got to change the law. I'm in housing court with my friend Bill Leslie. We're watching case after case all day long. Finally, Bill couldn't stand anymore. My friend stood up and said, Your Honor, yes, Reverend. If it please the court, may I ask a question? Yes, Reverend. Where is the justice in this courtroom? Your Honor, we've been watching all day as you side with slumlord after slumlord in every single case. Judge didn't bat an eye. He said, Reverend, this is not a court of justice. This is a court of law. If you want justice, change the law. I have never heard it more plain why we cannot solve the problems of the city by programs in the ghetto, by church planting in the ghetto. Yes, we need all of those things, but somebody has got to access the power. And in our next session, we're going to talk about a church, a whole new kind of church, a church with a community development corporation, a church with a strategy to empower the people who live there rather than gentrify and replace them. Oh, one final word about Nehemiah. In chapter 11, once he got his wall built, he went on a preaching tour. He went to places like, Highland Park. And he said, I don't expect all of you to move into the neighborhood. The hood's bad. Choose 1 out of 10 to come and live in the city, in the neighborhood. It's called tithing people to rebuild places. Now, Nehemiah did not ask them to come in first thing. He did his empowerment thing. He got the people here building the wall. Once he got them empowered, then he went out and said, I need resource reallocation, what Bob Lupton in Atlanta calls return flight. But a tithe is enough. I tell pastors, if you don't have a plan to tithe people into next door to every playground and grammar school in your community, you don't believe in tithing. This is a book that teaches tithing. You know what it says in Nehemiah 11, 1 and 2? It says they chose 1 out of 10. And in verse 2 it says, and they blessed. And the Hebrew word there, barakah, means ordained. They laid hands on the people. They're lay people willing to move into the city. So Esther, one layperson, has to go inside the system, access the power, and change the law. If we can't get these systems changed, Esther teaches us that sin is more than personal. It is also systemic when it's written into the law code. You can't just repent of it. You've got to change the law. You've got to access power. But the other thing that has to happen is we need some resource reallocation. We need some outside gifts. Grace is an outside gift. So some people have to steward that gift. We need a whole new kind of church that comes in not to run programs. That's what everybody else does. The church should not say, give us the money so we can run programs in this neighborhood. That's what everybody else is doing. That is not empowering this community. We need a church that says, let us come in incarnationally. We can empower this neighborhood. Ghettos are hard to change. They don't go away quickly. If you want to read a foreign story on this, Janice Perlman has a magnificent book called The Myth of Marginality. It's about ghettos in Brazil. And it is about favelas, and the myths are that the people in them are incompetent. She proves they are not. And secondly, that ghettos are a financial drain on the city, and she proves that's false. In fact, she proves that the ghettos, the so-called favelas or slums, are the incubators of entrepreneuriality for the city. So it isn't just a U.S. phenomenon I'm describing here. I'm asking for a church that empowers the people to win back lost territory. Colossians 1 has said we can take on the principalities and powers. God help us. Let's do it.